Okay, I've got a little bit of a problem this morning. The starter's starting to go out on my car. Has anybody here ever worked on a car? A couple of you. Lori, have you ever worked on a car before?
No.
Okay, well, it should be like super easy. I've got some instructions here. It details everything that you need to replace the starter. My car's the gold 2000 Rodeo in the parking lot without the parking sticker. Don't tell campus security. And my keys are right there. It should be completely super easy to replace it. You'll just probably need to pull out the exhaust system, but it's easy. The instructions are all right here. So can you take care of that for me, please?
No way.
No way. Why not?
Because I've never done this.
So what you're telling me is even though you have the instructions and I've told you what you need to do, you don't know how to do it because you've never done it before, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, this is actually a problem that we're facing now with the growing importance of a college education, the value that society is placing on it. In the pursuit of a degree, students will spend tens or hundreds of $1,000s on their education, and after 4+ years of trying to get a degree, they're left with empty pockets and a head full of theoretical knowledge. I'm not here to argue that we don't need college because Exhibit A, I'm here. I'm obviously a fan, but that the value of a college degree is overinflated by society. We're going to take a look at a little bit of the history of college, why it became so popular to begin with, the things that colleges aren't teaching us, and the things that we can be doing instead to help us be better people. So we'll start with what made college so popular to begin with. The first colleges sprung up in America before it was an independent nation. Between 1636, right after the Mayflower landed, and 1775, the American Revolution, 9 prestigious colleges started in New England, including Harvard, Yale, Brown, Columbia, and Rutgers. The purpose of these colleges were to teach young men doctrine and to get them started in the clergy. The problem was that this expanded the growing gap between genders, races, and classes, because only wealthy young white men were able to attend these colleges. College continued to be a commodity available only to the wealthy young white men up through 1944, right after World War II, when the GI Bill was enacted. And what the GI Bill did and still does, is pays for 3 years of full tuition for a young man who has served in the military. This was necessary because while the men who had worked in factories were off fighting the war, the women had come in to take their places at the factories and with lower wages, and so the men came back to no jobs. The GI Bill helped get them into white-collar jobs and started this kind of expanding idea of college education. College didn't become available to women and to non-whites until the 1960s and 1970s with the civil liberties movement and the women's liberation. And this is where the problems started, not because of who the education was available to, but because colleges and universities realized that they could capitalize on how many people wanted an education. According to an article on randomhistory.com, in spite of early funding and optimism in the 1970s and 80s, the economic return measured against the cost of college peaked. And in the last 2 decades, inflation has carried the cost of higher education to seemingly prohibitive levels. Yet parents and students continue to sacrifice to enroll in college, often incurring unruly debt because of complex student loans. That's a lot of words, but essentially what it means is now, at this point, we are paying more for college than we are getting out of it. The value of what we put into it is not as high as the effect of having a college degree. So this brings us into the 21st century in this classroom. What are we not learning in college? We all know some of the classes we take in college, maybe algebra or calculus, political sciences, maybe an art class or two. But there's a lot that we're not being taught. We spend 14, 16 hours a week sitting in class with maybe double that amount of homework, and we're not really doing anything. We have practices, we have, there are labs, internships sometimes later in your study, but the majority of the time is spent in books and in lectures. This turns out graduates who are not only underqualified and overeducated, but they're also unemployable. According to Dr. Bonnie Snyder, in an article for the Huffington Post, 4.7 million of the 9 million unemployed population have been to college, and most even have a college degree. From my viewpoint, this is because we spend so much time learning and filling our heads with this theoretical knowledge that once we get to an employer, we don't know how to do anything. We have no skills other than just this head full of knowledge. Then there's the problem of common sense, or as we know it, street smarts. We need to be able to think on the fly, to adapt, and to pick up on social cues. And those sorts of things aren't taught in college. In fact, one could say they're even discouraged. As we learn to play by the rules, we learn to prepare weeks in advance, and don't you ever deviate from the syllabus. These things are not necessarily practical for real life. This rigid environment produces cookie cutter students who all can pass a test with their eyes closed but couldn't navigate a social situation to save their lives. So I've kind of turned this into a perfect example of a college course. I've given you some boring history. I've talked about what you haven't learned, but now there's still hope. There's still something that we can do. There are still skills that we can learn to make ourselves better. We can start by strengthening our non-school skills, having somebody teach you a trade, or picking up a book on a different subject and reading it, trying it just for fun. Another great way to do that is to learn a foreign language. Move to a different country and immerse yourself in that language. It doesn't matter if it's for 4 months or 4 years. The things that you'll learn while being immersed in that type of situation will be invaluable. Now, we do teach foreign languages here at Fullerton, but the problem with it is that according to Dr. Sarah Eaton, it takes about 10,000 hours of study to become fluent in the language. Now, to break that down, the typical foreign language class here is 5 hours a week. So for 5 hours a week, it'll take you about 38 years to become fluent in a language. But if you move to a different country, you're exposed to it maybe 16 hours a day on average. 16 hours a day times 7 days a week is 112 hours of exposure to this language. At that rate, it'll take you less than 2 years to get to the same point of fluency. So, as I said, I'm not here to bring down the college system. I'm a big fan of college, I'm a big fan of learning, but there does need to be a paradigm shift in corporate America where they look less at what degrees, what credentials we have, and more at what we can actually do. And while that change won't come around immediately, maybe by strengthening ourselves and our skills, we can start to show corporate America that these things are valuable as well. Thank you.
All right, Nora, what did you think?
I thought the beginning was very fun, and you changed how she interacted with Lori and the humor of the interaction. I thought she was very confident and knowledgeable of the topic, and she really emphasized and clearly stated what her point is in the argument. She had very good structure and organization, and she had very good
Source citations.
source
That's
citations.
okay. We knew what you meant.
Yeah. I really liked her conclusion. It was very strong, and it brought back her point of view. And I really liked her speech.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that the attention device was very creative and interesting and got people going, and it was an easy way to sort of relate to what you were talking about. When you made the transition to the main topic, that was interesting. You had a very clear statement of what your goal was, and there's an excellent layout of the structure at the beginning of the speech. I did think that during the body of the speech that the structure was not quite as clear as you had set up at the beginning, and it felt sometimes like I had wandered into a different territory, and there's not as easy a way of following it as there could be. Now, of course, that might make you cookie cutter if you did it all that way. On the other hand, you know, sometimes you need to get the alphabet before you start writing sentences, and you know, so I think maybe a little bit more attention to that would be appropriate. The historical information is interesting, so that pulls us in a little bit, and the way that education has evolved, I think that's an important point. But what at the end of the speech, you're talking about how people shouldn't, you know, corporate America, for instance, shouldn't be looking necessarily for college degrees. Well, what, you know, it sounds to me like what you talked about at one point, that's what they were looking for. But at this particular point, is it corporate America that's driving this, or is it the ease of being able to get access, which was difficult before and now relatively easy, that is creating this particular kind of problem? You mentioned, you know, the large number of people who are unemployed who have college degrees. I could probably tell you exactly what their college degrees are in. And the ones who are employed who have college degrees, I can give you a pretty good idea what their college degrees are in. So I'm not exactly sure that it's just having a college degree that is the problem. It's maybe the choices that people have made, that they are not necessarily looking at the things that the corporate world, for instance, needs or wants. You won't find a lot of unemployed accountants. You will find a lot of unemployed English majors, you know, as unfortunate as that might be. I thought that you did a pretty good job getting information into the speech, plugging it in a way that was interesting. Like I said, I sometimes felt like the argument is not developing quite the way you want it to. I know generally where you're headed, and it's interesting while you're going there. It just needs to be kicked in a little bit firmer. You need to make those reasoning jumps, I think, more strongly. The presentation, there's so many things that you do nicely that it feels kind of picayune to look at those other kinds of things. I think you've got pretty good variety in your voice. Your demeanor, especially in that opening section, was really effective. That comes across. I do sometimes think, though, that you are a little casual about the gestures and that kind of thing, and sometimes your voice just drops down a little much. Not big deals, just as I'm always telling people, I try to point out the things that people can do better on. Sometimes there are fewer things to point out, and sometimes there are a lot of things to point out. This is relatively few. Okay? All right, thank you.